Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Creative Confidence Podcast. I'm your host, Mina Seetharaman. Today, I'm joined by Angela Kochoska, Data Science Design Lead at IDEO and co-instructor of IDEO's new course, Human-Centered Research with AI. In this episode, Angela is answering listener questions on how to use AI intentionally in your research process, whether you're doing market research, exploring a new opportunity space, or just trying to understand your customers more deeply. Angela is a research scientist who works with generative AI, natural language processing, and mixed methods at IDEO. Before that, she was a postdoctoral researcher in computational astrophysics with a PhD from the University of Ljubljana. So when she talks about what AI can and can't do with data, she really knows what she's talking about. These questions came in during our live recording with Hannah Rosenfeld, Angela's co-instructor. If you haven't heard that episode yet, go back and listen to it. It's a great foundation for everything we cover today. Angela and Hannah are both teaching human-centered research with AI at IDEO. The first cohort starts May 21st. You can learn more and enroll at IDEOU.com. If you'd like to hear more conversations like this one, please subscribe to the Creative Confidence Podcast. We've got an amazing lineup of guests coming up in the next few months. Okay, here's my conversation with Angela Kochoska. Hi, Angela. Welcome to the Creative Confidence Podcast. We're really excited to have you here with us today.
Hi, Mina. Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So before we get into the questions, we're excited that you're going to take our listener questions. Hannah did the previous episode of this, and tons of questions, lots of activity in the chat. But before we get into all of that, we'd just love to give our listeners a little bit more context on who you are. Because from what I hear, your path to this work here at IDEO is really interesting. You went from developing machine learning algorithms for sky surveys for people like NASA and the European Space Agency to doing design research at IDEO. And I feel like there's an interesting story there. So how did you make your way to all of us?
I like to say I just stumbled into IDEO and design by way of stumbling into data science and machine learning. So it's like, I don't think any of this was very much on my life plan or roadmap because in high school, I just decided that astronomy is freaking amazing and that's my life calling and I need to do it. So I was that like nerdy kid with a small telescope on her balcony looking at Saturn and stuff like that. But
I
like,
have some nerdy kids like that, so I love this.
yay!
Okay.
I want to meet them and take them out observing because I haven't done that in a long time.
All right.
The funny thing is, like, by the time I went from that high schooler with a telescope on a balcony to like doing my actual PhD in astrophysics, there was no really telescopes. It was all big data there's
Yeah.
telescopes that are big observatories and out there in space, but what the actual scientists typically work with is just like copious amounts of data that these
Right.
instruments take. And like the lucky ones do still get to go to observatories. I have some friends who do that, and I did do that as part of my PhD, but that's like not where the biggest like breakthroughs happen anymore. So kind of like as part of that work, I just started using machine learning algorithms for classification for stuff like that. My field was binary stars, and
Oh, wow.
specifically these like contact binaries, so stars that are so close together that they sort of like merge into this peanut shape.
Oh, my
And they
goodness.
leave very noticeable observational signals in this data that we get. So like all of that data science and machine learning stumbling into was to find those stars in data so that I can analyze them. And then it turned into more and more things. But at one point, I was like, okay, this is fun. And also, there's like me and maybe 5 other people in the world who care about this. And maybe I can kind of like do things that have more immediate impact on people's lives and on
Interesting.
Earth. So, like, this was very much during COVID, like reevaluating everything, when we're all at home and not knowing what to
Yeah.
do with ourselves. I was like, what am I doing with my life? Um,
I feel like that was a
so
period where we were all
yeah,
reevaluating our life choices. Absolutely.
very much so. And I was lucky because I did kind of like have couple of years of postdoc, sort of like to figure it out. And then I started applying to more jobs outside of academia, and IDEO was hiring for data scientists. And here I am. And
Excellent.
I didn't even actually know what IDEO does before I applied, which is kind of embarrassing because so many people who come here are like, oh my God, this was my dream job. And I was like, I just found out about this job on LinkedIn and it sounded really cool.
It's really
um,
true. That's super funny though. Like I have told people I've secretly wanted to work here for 20 years before I actually came to work here. But
mhm.
I do think there's the flip of there are some IDOers who, don't really know much about the company before they
Yeah.
start here, but then they come and contribute just the most awesome things. So if
I hope
you
I'm one of those.
I think so. I think so. But if you look at this, like, the background is super interesting. In some ways, I love how recent that contemplation was, but for
Mhm.
sure that your background must show up in the work that you do with clients. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it sort of filters its way into your um, research practice right now, especially around
Mhm.
using AI?
Yeah. So I think my first couple of weeks or even months at IDEO, I felt like I got a research methodology whiplash because just coming from this world of super analytical, like all data, all numbers, rigorous methodology, like modeling, computational stuff to like the freaking whimsy and awesomeness of just being in spaces with people and observing and talking to them. I actually took the IDOU Hello Design Thinking and Insights to Innovation courses
Oh,
just
awesome.
to get set up and understand what is the space that I'm playing at right now. And then I immediately fell in love with design research. I was like, I can't believe I lived without this all this time. So all of this to say, I think it's the way that this makes up my work today
Yeah.
is I sit in this very interesting intersection of like having this background of all these rigorous, deep, analytical ways of doing research, and then being like the utmost design research fangirl, and trying to merge the two in ways that make sense. So, like, I am the person that will tell people, you don't need to do this with data. You don't need a survey. You don't need quant. You don't need AI. Just like go talk to people. And I'm also the person who would be like, hey, I think this is a way that AI can meaningfully contribute to this work in ways that we couldn't do before. So it's more like, I will talk about, I think later about like specific tools and ways that I use AI, but I think where I'm really interested to think about and operate is what is that intersection of all of these methodologies and how they can best play together to do things that we couldn't do before or do them better or do them faster.
I'm So now, on top of your client work with all of your IDEO colleagues, you have built this course with Hannah around AI and research. And would love to know what that process is like. What was sort of most surprising about creating it? Were there particular aspects of it that you really enjoyed in the process?
Yeah. I think in the day to day at IDEO, just on client projects, you don't really get to interface with a lot of other researchers. So having that container and space to just nerd out with Hannah on research was amazing. I think so many of the little threads that we individually had about AI and research and overall how our design research practice is evolving, we just like made something bigger and better and more magical by having the course to play with.
I think that's
And
great.
yeah, the most surprising thing for me, um, overall, I think because Hana is so embedded in design research methodology, and I am more just understand how LLMs work and pros and cons of using AI in research. I found ways to think about AI that I didn't before from the aspect of just expanding design research in new ways. Like Hannah's point about deploying bias intentionally
Mm.
instead of trying to mitigate it, that was such a big unlock for me because I was always like, look at how all these models are biased. We can't use them in research because they will bias our research. But then, like, kind of really reframed how I think about it. So I'm so grateful for having done the course with her.
I find that such an interesting perspective that I think is relatively unique to IDEO, like where other people are like, no, don't do that. It's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to poke at it a little bit and say to ourselves, what can this help us uncover that we weren't paying attention to before? This came up in it comes up a lot actually in the AI and design thinking workshop, for example, where everybody's like, oh, hallucinations, watch out for those are bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the position that we take is like, yeah, you should be reading the outputs and making sure they actually make logical sense.
Yep.
But what is a hallucination suggesting to you that maybe like it creates a space that you could dig around or explore that you hadn't really considered exploring
Yeah.
before? So not totally surprising to me that you're raising this as an example.
Mm-hmm.
That this whole notion of bias, because I think her line is something along the lines of it's not bias isn't the problem, it's like unchecked bias that's the problem. So if you're
Exactly.
aware of
Yeah.
it, you can utilize it to your advantage,
Yeah.
which I think is not the instinct. We sort of like two hands go up and we try to avoid it.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. There is something interesting about like how can you use those things as tools in your toolkit,
Yeah.
as opposed to simply just avoiding them.
Yeah. And they're unavoidable. In large language models, the way they're designed, I
Of
think there
course.
was this big misconception in the beginning where people just assumed it's a Google search that talks back and it like
Yeah.
pulls factual information, but it doesn't. It's just making words up,
Yeah.
following rules that somehow make it make sense.
Well, it's calculating probabilities really, right?
Exactly.
Like, is it
Yeah.
more likely in the sentence that I'm constructing that the man bit the dog or the dog bit the man, right? Like, that's
Exactly.
kind of what
Yep.
it's doing.
Yeah.
Also, the idea that every Google search returns something factual to you is something you could
Yeah.
maybe question also. Um,
100%.
so with that, why don't we actually turn to some of the questions from our
Mhm.
audience and our general community? Our first question actually comes from Sarah.
Okay.
And she's asking, how do you validate AI assisted synthesis so that researchers can distinguish between a genuine insight and an AI generated pattern?
This is such an interesting question. And
Hmm.
my first kind of like gut reaction to this is the answer is already in the question, the way that Sarah framed it,
Right?
because that is exactly what AI does. It generates patterns. And I think Hannah also hinted on this, like what we call insight at IDEO may not really be like an analytical insight or an insight in a business or marketing setting. So I think at IDEO by default, we don't consider whatever AI outputs an insight. It's just a pattern that it found in the data. And then we use those patterns alongside our own thinking and work and experience of doing research in the field with people to figure out what is that meaty and juicy and interesting and actionable point that all of these patterns are pointing us to and turn it into an insight. But that is not to say that AI can't generate insights because you can prompt it to be like, find the juicy things. Tell me something insightful from this data. And even I've tried this, and even in those cases, what AI may consider an insight and how it may frame it, or even like what it may consider a juicy quote or an interesting evidence from research to support that insight is not the same as like a human who's lived through research will come to that. So, what I do on my projects typically is take all the notes, take everything we have from research, do that first round of AI generated patterns, as Sarah called them, and then have the team go over them and just pick them apart and be like, oh, yeah, this is really cool. This is interesting. Let's like park it somewhere to come back to it for insights and synthesis. And this is actually not that big of a deal. A lot of people mentioned it, but it's a known thing. Just so many people mentioned it that it made it into patterns, but we're not going to use it for insights. So it's very much that iterative and building on the AI patterns to get to insights is where kind of like the magic happens, I think, if you are using AI in the first place, which you don't have to.
Right. I think that's really interesting because it is that as you were talking, it sort of struck me. It's the critical thinking piece, right? Like looking at those patterns critically to say, oh, this is something that's sort of insightful, and we
Hmm.
need to figure out like where we take it from here. Like,
Yep.
where do we go deeper? What might be the really kind of golden nugget that
Hmm.
we want to base something on? Whereas, like, we should be using our own judgment to say, honestly, I've been reading about that for 5 years. It's not that insightful. It's practically common
Exactly.
knowledge in the general zeitgeist. And so this isn't the thing that we would build a new solution on. So
Exactly.
I think one of the points that both you and Hannah try to make is that those are skills, those are human skills as human researchers that we use, and we shouldn't just abdicate them or like let
Hmm.
them fall by the wayside because a machine has given us something. There are ways to sort of use it to supplement and then use our own skills to make some of those critical thinking decisions.
Exactly. And I think just to preface this, um, this might be a bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it
Mhm.
is worth mentioning that the reason that AI can't give us insights like that is because the models we're currently working with weren't designed to do that. They
Right.
are language models. They produce language based on input and their architecture, which, as you said, works on probabilities and stuff like that. But like meaning and language and sense making are similar, but they're not the same things. So, all of this to say, maybe there will be sense making models that can
Right.
operate at the level that a human would on like pulling all these different threads and figuring out what is in the zeitgeist, what is interesting, and all that. Right now, we can't do that with AI, and that's why we don't. But even when we maybe are able to do that, it's still different how an AI would think about things and how humans would. I think I'll hammer this point way too often in the podcast, so I'm sorry, but it's not about like outsourcing on or replacing or even augmenting. It's just like it's different intelligences, it's
Yeah.
different modes of operation, and it's all about figuring out what each one shines in so that they work together to produce something bigger than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good way of describing it because it, I think, forces us to remember to be present, like, and engaged, right? Like, it's sort
Exactly.
of, I think a lot of people do think you can kind of just outsource to it. But the reality is that you really do need to apply your own kind of sense making and
Mhm.
meaning making to a lot of what you see.
Yep.
And frankly, catch things that, you don't think are appropriate. And I think that that's, a layer that we at least still now need and should take some
Exactly.
accountability around. I think it's a good lead into the next listener question, actually. Um, how do you stop AI from producing plausible sounding themes that flatten nuance or overstate confidence?
I I don't know that you could outright stop it from doing those things. Because, as I said, it's like part of the design to find the averages, to find the
Right,
probabilities,
right.
to
It aims for the
flatten
mean.
nuances. Yes.
Yeah,
So I think you can play around with different prompts to begin with, to see if you get the kind of level of nuance that you want, because it is capable of nuance. You just need to sort of like handhold and guide AI to where you want it to go. So there's like that level of you can change the prompt and play with it to get to a place that you're happy with. You can also change the context you give it, the level of context. So this context window management is also a thing that's really prominent in software development and code management right now,
Mm.
because AI can do so many things, but it anchors on one, the patterns in the data that it's been trained on, and all the knowledge that you give it to work with. So there are ways to manage that to get to the output that you want. There's such a thing as too little context, which will default to means, and there's such a thing as too much context where you start to lose bits of the nuance and things because it can't handle all of what you give it at a time. So depending on what you're working with, there are levels of iteration and experimentation to figure out what kind and level of prompting and what kind and level of context gets you to where you want to get to in the nuance versus means and flattening output.
I think that's super helpful. It reminds me of, in the times before AI, if you were writing a creative brief, for a creative team, the more detailed and nuanced that brief was, the better the output was going to be, right?
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
if you're really concerned about having much more nuanced output, just saying like, write me a haiku is not that useful, but
Yep,
giving it
exactly.
a much more detail. I want this haiku to be about this person and really tap into this
Yeah,
personality trait. And like the more specific you can be about the context it needs to work within, you'll just get a
yeah,
more accurate or detailed output probably.
yeah. There's also one last thing I will say that often works when you're going after a specific level of output. It's the one shot or few shot prompting where you
Mm,
just craft the output that you want to see and you give it an example. And then it will follow that example closely and maybe that's what you want, but then you're doing a different kind of format flattening that
right.
will force it to a certain output and you may be missing things that it would just like come up on its own. So the two words that always come to mind when I talk about working with AI, it's relational,
Hmm.
and emergent. Nothing is set in stone and nothing is isolated from how you interact with AI, at least right now. Agents are a completely different thing. We don't have to get into that. But when it comes to kind of like you holding the reins, relational and emergent are the two things that um, you can't avoid.
That's excellent. So another question from a listener, the idea that AI makes humans more important in the process is true, but met with massive skepticism as it seems self-serving. Have you encountered that and how do you address it?
So I think this is an important thing to acknowledge that there's, at least in this moment of time, still all this fear that AI will replace humans in all these different capacities. And
Right.
and that's true. And we see it play out in industries already. And it does force us into this kind of binary way of thinking of it'll either replace us
Mm,
or we're irreplaceable, or there are aspects of us that are replaceable and there are aspects of us that are irreplaceable. And I think coming back to my point about it's not about replacing and how similar AI can perform the way humans do, it's about how different it is to humans. So the reason I think that fear is here is because it can so plausibly emulate human output and human
right.
performance, but it is also different enough that it falls short so often. And I wouldn't say that it makes humans overall more important in the process, but it makes aspects of humans more important in the research process as participants, as researchers, even as thought partners, because AI can't bring the lived experience of a human being. It can't bring the expertise accumulated over years of field work and writing
Mm,
papers and talking to other experts and consuming all kinds of content that aren't just like this one specific thing that you're asking that person about. So keeping all of these things in mind, you can kind of figure out still what humans are important for and then just use that instead of trying to be like they're either important or not important, or is it self-serving or not self-serving. Even like the one last point on like the thought partnership, I think that is where a lot of people say today they use AI as a thought partner, and I find that having human thought partners is still so important because that's where you get the different perspectives. AI is a thought partner in a way that it will kind of like follow your thread of thinking, and
mhm.
it can challenge it and it can give you more context. It can pull all these sources that you can learn from, but sometimes just like one word from another person can trigger something completely different that you hadn't thought about, completely unprompted. You don't have to prompt a human to answer to you. So there's that. Sometimes they'll be like, no, that's dumb. Shut up. That's what you need to hear.
Yeah, I think it's actually interesting because I've heard this from a number of IDEOers. Last year we had Jennifer Lowe on the show, and she was saying that actually she uses AI in the featuring process for very specific things, but she still feels like number one is when she's trying to sort through signals or identify trends. Almost the best thing is to get in a room with a bunch of IDEOers because they are
Yep.
unafraid to say to you, I don't know that I agree with you there. And
Yep.
they just come up with ideas that you would never even have thought to look at in a way that AI sort of follows a trail and you kind of have to move it off the trail to get to somewhere. You don't have to do that kind of work with humans. They will
Exactly.
go off into the forest if they want to find
Yeah.
the truffle they're looking for. So
Or you will randomly have a person who's been in a forest looking for truffles. And they'll be like, oh, this reminds me of that one time I did this thing. And you don't it's like AI is a perspective. It's a voice in the room. It has a specific voice and it has a specific perspective. And that's where it stops. But like AI hasn't lived in like Macedonia like I have, or in India like my coworker has. So sometimes we'll just like get
Right.
into these conversations that have nothing to do with work and still find inspiration from things from our childhood that are completely different from how American kids grew up. And I don't think AI even has any of that kind of like embodied
Yeah.
knowledge to bring to the table.
Well, also, its natural bias is whatever the data is that model was
Mhm.
trained on, right? And
Yep,
so
totally.
you have to remember that as well.
Yeah.
Nina asks us, when do you know you've crossed into using AI for outsourcing your thinking, and how do you find evidence to retract or restart? It's a good question.
I feel this is like everyone needs to build their own personal flags to figure this
Yeah.
out. I can tell you my own. It's a couple of things. I find myself sometimes just like skimming through the output and not really internalizing it and reading it. And then I'm like, well, now AI is doing all the work. I'm not actually like thinking. I'm just like asking it to output more and more stuff. So like that, the level of attention you pay to the output and how you work with the output
Yeah.
is the one thing. The other thing I've noticed recently is who is asking the questions and who is giving the long answers. Sometimes alongside this like skimming of long output, you know how lovely any model today would be like, would you like me to do this other thing for you? And I'll just be like, yes, please. And it goes like, blah, 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 blah. Would you like me to do this other? I'm like, yes, thank you. That's cool. And like, once you get into that mode where AI is just like vomiting at you and you're asking it to vomit more at you without really thinking about what you're getting. That is so like, even like the ratio of AI text versus your answer, that is the other thing I always pay attention to. And
Yeah.
then the last thing is just like this like idea of like, any kind of learning, any kind of thinking is like you need to be able to explain it to another person if you've internalized it and if you've done the thinking. So if you stop that work with AI and you have no idea what to do with it, it's probably outsource the thinking to AI. So those are mine. I'm sure there's like a million other things that people can do to figure this out, but um, one of our coworkers during our AI day built this performance tax calculator thing, which I thought was insane. It tracked how much time you spend reprompting AI versus getting new output. And I
Yeah.
think that's also like there's probably metrics like that that you can literally build into the models that will flag when you're not doing any actual thinking of your own and you're just asking it to do stuff for you.
Yeah, I feel like those are all really good signs. I have a real tendency to I when I won't say yes to the "Would you like me to do this?" I
Mhm.
often my answer is no. I wasn't done with the other thing yet because
Mhm.
I want to go in a different direction
Yep.
now, and
Yes.
And I feel really proud when I do that because I'm not just falling into the track. But but that idea of also recognizing there's a point of diminishing returns. Like if I'm now prompting you to try and get like an image perfect, it might just be easier for me to open that thing up in Figma and now turn it into something else, right? Rather than spending 22 prompts. I was at an event recently and there was a creative director speaking, and he was talking about how he was talking to somebody, and they said, "Oh, we prompted till our fingers hurt to create that piece of creative." And he's like, "Think you're missing the point here." And that idea of like the prompt isn't always the work, right? Like maybe the work is the work, like kind of reminding ourselves a little bit sometimes.
On a recent work, we also spent like, it was a very important project. Language was very important to get right, like had to craft value propositions, strategy, all these things. So me and another coworker spent so much time in ChatGPT to try to get the right words in each slide. And then we had one of the design research directors come in to review those slides. And I remember him being like, "What are you even saying here?" And I would say what we're trying to say and be like, "Why don't you just say that?" It's so much clearer than whatever is on the slide right now. And that's when we realize, like, just like prompting till your fingers hurt to get to like some ideal version of a paragraph is not really the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Know what I can do, because my share does.
So another one of our listeners asks, what does good prompting actually look like in a research context? What separates a researcher who gets useful output from one who doesn't?
Today's definition of creative excellence. With new tools like AI reshaping
Again,
our workflows,
I wouldn't
teams
say
collaborating
there's
across time
one
zones and disciplines,
right answer
and
here,
organizational structures shifting all
because
around us. The definition of excellent
any
work
work
is
and
changing.
any research work
It's
can
often
be
easier to
so
spot creative
multifaceted
excellence
that
than to describe
how
what
you
makes it so.
prompt
So
depends
how does
on
IDEO's CEO define it?
what
I'm
kind of
talking
data
to him
you're
to
working
find
in,
out.
what is the context you're
Mike
working
Peng's
in,
journey
what is
spans
the output
neuroscience
you're
labs,
trying to
venture
get.
building in
So
Tokyo, and nearly 20 years leading
I
creative
think
teams
the
across
one
cultures.
mindset,
He
though,
co-founded
that is
IDEO's
important
Tokyo
to
studio,
remember
helped launch
here
Japan's
as
first design-focused
like,
VC fund,
and I wouldn't even
served as
say
chief
good or
creative
bad
officer at
researcher,
New
just
Creative
like
Lab before
something to
stepping
keep
into
in
IDEO's
mind
top
to
leadership role. And
continue
if you've taken
doing
IDEO You's Cultivating
human-centered
Creative
research and not
Collaboration course, you
outsourcing your
might already
thinking
be
is
familiar
something
with
I
Mike's
think
approach
Hannah
to
also
leadership. As the
talked a lot
instructor,
about.
he
And
shares
it's
his personal
this
approach to
curiosity
navigating complexity,
to get
unlocking
to
team
asking better
creativity, and
questions
finding clarity
and
in the
not just
mess.
getting the
In this
answers.
episode, Mike and I talk
So
about
the whole
ingredients
point of being a
creative
researcher
excellence,
is
why a little
asking
friction
good
is a
questions,
thing,
asking the
how
right questions,
experimentation keeps your
asking
craft
interesting
sharp,
questions. So
and why inspiration isn't just a nice to have for a leader,
if you
but part
can
of the
use
job.
AI
If
more
you're
in
leading a
that
team, growing
capacity,
your leadership
you are
practice,
becoming
or
a
simply
better
trying to stay
researcher through
creative in a
using
world that's
AI
always shifting,
and not
this
losing
one's for
research
you.
skills by letting
All right,
AI do the
let's jump
thinking for
in.
you.
Here's my conversation with Mike
Yeah,
Peng.
I think that's a really good point. We do get caught up in asking it for answers, but sometimes we can actually just use it to shape our questions. That's a really
Exactly.
good point. Niyati asks us, how do we move from AI-generated insights to meaningful human-centered decisions?
The big word, insights.
Yeah.
There's something that comes to mind here, that I think if the listeners are interested in learning more about it, I can sort of like plug our paper here. Is
Cool.
that okay to do? Me and two now IDEO alumni wrote a paper on, we called it Encounters of Human and Artificial Intelligence in Innovation. It's an epic paper. And my coworker, Will Notini, wrote this really long and well thought out argument on something he called team intelligence, which as sort of like a contrast to artificial intelligence. And the whole premise there was like, it's not really about the output. Because you can say the output of research is a research report that someone like a C-suite level stakeholder looks at and is like, all right, they did research. Here's like some numbers and some insights. And now let's get to do the actual work that this informs, right?
Right.
And AI can do that. Those are the like AI generated insights. It can make a report that synthesizes, again, what we call synthesis at IDEO is not the same as like an AI synthesis thing. But like synthesizes all the work and like puts it in a neat little report, and someone looks at it for 5 minutes and then just like shelves it and goes on to like deploy some of the learnings from that report. But the human centeredness in innovation, especially, and these new decisions come from the team intelligence that is developed when you're immersed in the field, the problem space that you're working on. It's a different thing when you're just like looking at a screen and reading copious amounts of text on like what is going on in the world and actually being in the world and internalizing the learnings while you're in the process. So much of synthesis in the field at IDEO just happens in coffee shops after you've talked to someone and you're like, oh my God, this person blew my mind. This thing they said, this thing they said. And then you don't even need to look at the transcript from that interview ever again. But even in that conversation after the interview, you already have these nuggets of insights that you can carry forward. So that, I would say, for me and for the kind of work that we do at IDEO, the human-centered decisions happen in the room with the team, where all of these brains and intelligences intersect and work together to get to something meaningful, as opposed to having a research output that you reference in the decision making. I hope that was like a very long-winded way to answer the question. But
that's great. And we'll, so we do newsletter follow-ups, of course, every time we drop an episode. So we'll include a link to the paper. But I think that's such a thoughtful way of putting it, that it isn't. I keep thinking that one of the big things that can happen as, you know, in the LLM's world, things get stronger or faster or better, is that we actually start to believe our own hype, like our own armchair expertise. Oh, like I put 3 random bullets into an LLM and it turned it into this beautiful paragraph. Like I must be an expert. You know, it's actually not. You are not an expert in that at all, because you're not immersed in that space. And I think we forget that there are people out there still with real expertise, and simply just reading or culling from those things and then reading those things doesn't make you the expert now. That the expertise and the insights and the magic kind of happen in those more immersive problem spaces where you're really kind of getting into it and, you know, kind of rolling around in the thought a little bit, right? That's really where the best insights probably happen.
Exactly. And I think
do you think you could back up a little bit more, Angela? Sorry, I think you're a little too close. No, I just I don't know if it's because you're just getting excited, but you're getting a little close to the mic. I can't tell how far you are, but it should be like this, like 6 to 8 inches.
Oh no, this is because of the trying to stay upright.
Yeah, it's just when you get too close, it's like popping.
I see.
Like a little
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's always like a really tricky adjustment. It's so like with the camera angle and the mic and the computer.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to give one more example, because what you said about expertise reminded me of an actual project that we did. I think it was now maybe 3 years ago. It was 2023 when ChatGPT came out, and we're like, let's see how we can use AI in the design process. This was also an IDEO journal article called "We Tried to Design a Health Venture with ChatGPT."
Okay.
That was the name of it. Why I bring it up is because the 3 core team members on that project, none of us were experts in healthcare. And the actual scope of the project was how we might help people in rural areas get better access to healthcare. So it was this very complex and nuanced space of like, you have the rural setting on one end, and you have like the beast that is American healthcare to begin with, and trying to make a new health venture with it. So we spent maybe like 2 weeks trying to get smart with AI. And we did get to like some of those, like the most common um needs in rural healthcare, the most common experiences for people, like having to drive a long way to get to a hospital and stuff like that. Um, and then we tried to ideate with that, and we were stumped. It was kind of hard. And we had this brainstorming session with people at IDEO who are health experts. And I remember one coworker just like in 5 minutes coming up with all the ideas that it took us 2 weeks to get to with AI. And that is that, like, this person has seen so much, has worked on so much, has lived through so much that even he was saying, like, I don't know why you guys are struggling with using AI. This is not how I use it. Like, I actually get to meaningful outputs because I was like, because you're the expert and the way you use it is so different because you know what to ask. You know what to follow up on. You know how to probe deeper on these things to get to something that you don't know or you haven't thought about because you already know so much. And the other thing was, we talked to a person, we did an expert interview with a person who has worked like 20 years in rural healthcare and also like more urban settings that face similar problems like rural healthcare, like with access. And I remember me and the design researcher on the team, we almost cried during that interview. And it was just, wow. Okay. Again, 1 hour versus weeks of trying to get something out of AI. The third thing, this project was insane. The third thing was, we were also trying to see if we can interview AI, AI generated personas, which if you've ever talked to me, you know I am not pro
Not a fan.
Not a fan. AI-generated personas in design research specifically. Because of this experience, which was we had biased this persona so much to be struggling with language and understanding the doctor's recommendations because it was like not a native English speaker. And I remember in one of the outputs, it was like, yes, it's so hard when I get my doctor's notes in English and then me and my wife have to use Google Translate to understand it and all these things. And then I talked to my friend who is a doctor and she's like, no, we have to provide interpreters to people.
Yeah, it's actually a requirement.
It's a requirement. And I'm not saying that AI couldn't have told us this, but I think it was that like the way that we were prompting it and the way that we were interacting with it sort of like swayed it a different direction.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing, right? Because it can be helpful in so many ways, but this idea that a person's expertise doesn't matter anymore, I think is a fallacy. It makes such a difference. Even if what you're looking for is speed and efficiency, the way that you could use it if you had the actual expertise would be so much more efficient.
Exactly.
Yeah, super fascinating. Lucy asks us, what are your most used or recommended AI tools? This is always a question that comes up, actually, among our audience. They love to know what kinds of tools we're using.
This is always hard to answer because the field is moving at lightning speed. So what I say today may probably not be relevant tomorrow, which is why I think at IDEO and IDEOU, all the courses, we focus more on crafting these mindsets and frameworks that may be relevant longer term than the actual tools. Because even the tools themselves evolve. Like what they can do today is not the same as what they can do tomorrow. So in this snapshot in time, the tools that I use the most, Claude. Absolutely love Claude. From like the basic chat, Claude Code for prototyping, I just give it access to VS Code or Cursor or wherever I'm working with, great. It has access to my GitHub. It has access to everything. You can see on my GitHub that there's like, I have pushed things and Claude has pushed so many things. So I feel like I trust it, which is kind of like a weird thing to say. But if I had to choose between all these available models, I feel like I trust Claude the most, which is a very personal thing. It's not like it's the best model or whatever. They're good
Yeah,
for
I
different
refer to
things, but
I actually call it Claude, and I refer to it
Claude,
as my French boyfriend. Because in my head, Claude is a French name,
Claude.
and somebody at IDEO says it sounds like your French boyfriend's also a surfer, and I don't know why it sounds like that, but it's true. It is. There's something about it. Not that this is an ad for Claude, but it is. There's something about the way the fonts work and some of the human
Mhm.
interaction capabilities that it just
Yeah.
it feels more human in a way and more digestible somehow. But so I
And the funny
understand that.
thing is, I think Anthropic is the one company that isn't trying to do that. I think early on, they purposefully, you couldn't give Claude a persona. It
Oh
could
yeah,
impersonate anything. So it's so funny how these things work out. But
yeah.
definitely Claude for like general purpose things, I would say. Recently I started using Perplexity a lot because I heard
Mm,
from a friend who's deeper in that field that Perplexity is really good for research in particular because it works in a way that whenever you prompt it, it figures out what is the best smaller model to deploy on that particular task.
yeah,
So like someone at IDEO used it for market research and said it was mind blowing the output, how good it was. So I think it's definitely kind of like worth playing with, especially because also you can choose the different models that you want to use. You're not locked into one. Um, I use Notebook LM a lot
yeah,
for um, almost like knowledge management.
yeah.
Um, any kind of like new topic that I'm interested in, I would do the deep research with Notebook LM. I will try to find external sources, even through Claude or just like good old fashioned Google search, or I'll go on archive, pull some papers, and put them all in Notebook LM. Um, there are so many ways that you can then digest that summary of all of
Yeah.
your inputs in Notebook LM. I have to say, more and more, I am becoming less of a fan of the podcast and the video and all of these things, just because of that flattening
Yeah.
aspect of them. They're really good. The slide decks that it produces, I usually will do it and will like skim through it just to get a sense of what this whole problem space covers, but they don't go really as deep as I would want to. So my one favorite part of Notebook LM that I use a lot is the mind map, because it's
Mm,
almost like, here's all the content that you put in, and it sort of like clusters it in sub themes and subtopics that I can then sort of like click on and probe deeper and query from the original sources what that whole thing is about, instead of trying to tease it out from this like flattened slide deck or podcast or video or whatever it does. So like those things I will use if I don't have a lot of time and I just want to get a sense of everything that's in my documents. But if I want to go deeper, I start from the mind map and then just like talk to in the chat interface to see what it's all about.
I think
Um,
that's so
I have
interesting.
more.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
SciSpace is another one that is really cool for research.
Okay.
Um, it has come a long way from when I started using it. It used to just be like a deep research version, but the output, it was very cool because you would get a table of all the sources that it found and how they're relevant to your query and whether they're cited and like stuff like that. Don't quote me on this. I don't know exactly what was all in the table, but now they've blown it up to like do specific. I think there's biomedical research. There's like
Oh wow.
um archive. You can only query archive. You can turn the output in like a website or a report, or like there's all these different ways that you can interact with it. And I think that's all of them for now.
That's great. And to your point, in 3 months or 6 weeks, these could all change. But it's really interesting to see even, in the last few years, how much the space
Yeah.
has broadened, how much is available to us, and how each tool does something a little bit different. Like
Yep.
they all, like there's so many LLMs, but I don't use them all in the same way at all.
Yeah. I use Gemini whenever I want to buy something. It's
Really?
really, I've tried to find new like skincare products and stuff like that with Claude, and it's just so weirdly condescending. It's like, Angela, I don't think you should do this because of this small random thing. I'm like, oh my God, this is exhausting. Gemini, what's the best skincare product with these particular constraints? And it's so straightforward, and I always buy whatever it recommends.
I'm going to have to give that a try. I usually just take my son who took AP chemistry last year to the drugstore, and he'll say, don't buy that. Those molecules aren't small enough to pass through the skin barrier. And it's like,
Nice.
really? Just saved me $100. So
There's your expert.
he's my LLM. Another listener asks us, I worry that AI will make my work feel generic or that I'll lose the depth and specificity that makes research valuable. How do I protect against that?
Wow, that's the million-dollar question, really.
Right.
It's something all fields that AI is now entering are grappling with. I remember one early insight from a project we did around software development, where a lot of our learnings were, yes, AI can now perform at the level of a junior developer. And sort of like you can conclude from that you don't need to hire junior developers. But if you don't have junior developers, how are you ever going to have senior developers?
Right.
No one starts at a senior or executive level in their career. So I think it's important to keep in mind that even if AI can do something, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to do it, or you shouldn't learn the foundations of how to do that thing. There's an interesting, I think I saw it on Substack, like a post on Substack where someone said, um, a bunch of researchers asked 5 different LLMs the same question, and they got the sort of like the same output and the same answer. And they asked 5 different people that same question, and they got wildly different answers. So AI will get you to the average. So if you're starting into a new field and you're below the average, not like as a person, but as like how much you know and your skill set there, AI can help you get to that average faster, for sure. But if you just stop there, you stop at average and you don't go beyond that. So that's one thing to say, that there's like the depth and specificity come when we intentionally sort of like go through that friction of learning things ourselves, learning the fundamentals of coding, even if AI can code, right? If you want to code with AI, you should be able to code or at least understand what it's doing. I just ran into this problem. I was trying to use Claude to come up with a method to sort of like distribute participants in different groups for an activity, musical chair style. It was like 5 different topics, 5 different groups, and every round people need to switch topics, but not you weren't supposed to be with the same people at the same time. That was the constraint. And there was like an IDEO facilitator in every group, all of that. So like, yeah, this is a simple like optimization problem. I'll just ask Claude to come up with something. I spent 2 days trying to do that. It gave me so many different ways to slot people and do this algorithm. And every single time it would put 3 people in one group and 7 people in another group, or like have like 2 IDEO facilitators in one group instead of one. It was reprompting that, like the performance stacks of like reprompting and trying to get to something that is what I want to do. And then I just sat down. I was like, let me think through this. Oh, I want there to be only 5 people in each group. I can just calculate permutations of 5 people in each, and then I have all the list of all permutations, and I just ask the algorithm to pick from that list. I told that to Claude. First try, it worked perfectly. I wasted 2 days in all these different algorithms and approaches and things that it was telling me, and I still didn't like get the solution that I wanted, which is I keep getting like reminded and convinced that the way that AI thinks is one way, and it can give you so much output, but it may not be the right output. And it's by always learning and building yourself up that you can kind of like keep that depth and specificity.
Yeah. Gosh, it's a lot of food for thought, but I think it's really helpful. I think your work only needs to be generic if you allow it to be, basically, is how
Yep.
I've been thinking about it. And as you were talking, I was thinking about a piece that one of our partners wrote on Edges, which is kind of our blog, about if AI can do all these things, why should I bother learning how to do them? And it's like, it is actually because the craft matters, right? Like it is how you develop skill sets. And so
Yeah.
I love your analogy of if you use it to get to a certain level, but that's the only level you ever get to, you'll never be great. Like you might be good, you might be average, but you'll never be really insightful and very great at what you want to, at that expertise. So it is sort of finding the discipline to think about what you're going to allow in your work and what standards you want to set for yourself.
Exactly.
I think.
Yeah.
One question that comes up a lot in many facets for us, and so I'm not surprised to see it here from one of our listeners, is my organization is skeptical of using AI. How do I show the value of AI, especially in the research process, to a team that isn't on board yet?
So important, and definitely something that I've heard reiterated so many times, especially by researchers. The biggest kind of pause for me is, what capacity are you deploying AI in your organization? If the capacity that you're deploying it in is to outsource work that already works, and you have people that do that work, and now you're just giving it to an AI and it'll do that like mean average level of that work, I can totally understand the hesitation to do that. Just from displacing people to begin with, but also from like the quality of output and the quality of work that you do. But where I would think people get on board is when you can show how AI can expand and diversify what you can do in a research capacity instead of outsource existing aspects of it. So even on an organizational level, you can always think about what are parts and gaps that would make the organization better and work like more seamlessly and more efficiently and all of these things, and where AI can plug in to do that.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I was at a conference last year um, where the CEO of a large pharma company was talking about how most pharma companies at the time, when generative AI became kind of broadly available, they were locking it down. Like nobody was allowed to use it. So that idea of like being skeptical of it and what's it going to do. So really fear-based. Um, and he said, instead, I met with legal, and what we decided to do was put it on every single desktop in the company because we didn't know what to do with it at the time, and we didn't know where it could actually help augment the value chain. And we just encouraged people to use it because they could tell us where it would be useful. So it wasn't about working people out of a job or getting somebody to work get 80 hours of work done inside of 40 hours of work. It was about even understanding where the value might be. And so, yeah, some of them were using it to like complete annual performance reviews and those types of things, but they were actually finding places in the pharma value chain where it could be useful,
Mm-hmm.
like earlier in the research stages where they were organizing their thinking. And he said, like, I would never have come up with those things because I don't live that stuff day to day.
Yeah.
And so just that idea of like, not everything has to start from a place of fear and just taking your job away. But,
Yeah.
and this is a leadership thing. I almost think like we have to encourage people to figure out like what could be the right opportunity. And we have to model that a little bit ourselves. Like, I happily go and find Claude skills or write a strip of code and pass it off to the team and say, "Hey, does this work? Can somebody like
Yeah.
run this in our test environment and see if this would work?" Just to like, it's all that way. We're all just kind of
Yeah.
experiment. Life is one big experiment, right? And nobody should be
Exactly.
afraid of it. So
Yeah.
that idea of um, how can we all work together to figure out where the value exists, I think, as opposed to
Yeah.
how quickly can I reduce the number of headcount I have in a department,
Exactly.
can really change
Yeah.
the perspective.
And that totally resonates with what I'm seeing play out where people embrace AI
Mm,
in a research capacity at IDEO because it doesn't really outsource your work. It transforms it in ways that you
mm.
couldn't before. Like so many design researchers at IDEO vibe code
Yeah,
today
it's really
and
true.
bring functional prototypes in the field. And I think the most important thing is, especially if you're building AI products, this is something that I'm kind of like I will die on this hill. If you're building AI products, you can't not make AI functional prototypes to bring into research because it's not about where are people going to click on a screen anymore. It's not
Yeah.
about how are people going to interact with this product or this space. It's about that relationality of like you're talking to something that talks back. And as much as you have to do design research on humans, you need to do design research on AI and the relationship between humans and AI. This is where I think that like that skepticism long term may end up hurting a company instead of helping it because there's this whole new field of research that
Yeah.
requires you to understand AI and be able to query it and research it independently and in relation to humans to get ahead and to get to more meaningful outputs.
All right, Angela, thank you for taking all of our listener questions. Those were great. And now we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to head into the lightning round. It's like 7 questions that we've been asking every one of our guests. It's just, I think, a fun way for our audience to get to know everybody. So, number 1, what book, TV show, or movie would you recommend to our listeners?
I wanted to recommend so many books, but I'm gonna do one. Um, Always Coming Home by Ursula K. Le Guin is in my heart forever. I just read it
Really?
recently, and it's a very interesting take on sci-fi.
Okay.
Um, it's framed as it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's really interesting. Like a future ethnography of a people that lives in the Napa Valley, like in a post-apocalyptic world. But why I love it is because it frames really interestingly the value of humans and how humans can thrive in a world like this. And not to spoil anything, how like AI and technology coexist with that in ways that for the first time in sci-fi, I was like, this makes complete sense to me that there would be these two worlds coexisting in this particular way. That's all
Oh
I'll
my
say.
gosh. Super interesting. Okay. Who is a creative thinker you look up to?
I'm gonna cheat and do two
Okay.
and disguise a book recommendation in one.
Sneaky.
um First, like as an actual like creative thinker, I recently discovered James Bridle. They're an artist, creative technologist who very much all their work sits at the intersection of intelligences, both living and artificial. And the book that I'm going to recommend by James Bridle is called Ways of Being.
Okay.
And it really changed how I think about intelligence, period. Because there was one question in that book that stuck with me that was like, we historically have asked other species, how are you like us, to determine if they're intelligent. So we've kind of like framed intelligence to this through this lens of like, you should work and think and operate like a human in some ways, and therefore you're intelligent. So reframing that to asking what it's like to be you, and what is that particular intelligence that you inhabit? Like, what is the intelligence of fungi? What is the intelligence of trees? Like, trees move. Some trees move in response to climate change faster than humans. That is being more intelligent than us in so many ways. So
Yeah.
there's like stuff like that, but also connecting that to machine intelligence. And I'm just nerding out like insane right now. Like, just like the solidarity we owe to other intelligences and how to just like coexist in the world and not exploit them was a big unlock for me. So all of that to say, James Bridle, just follow them. Freaking amazing creative thinker. They have talks on YouTube and books and all these things. The other one, no, I have three. Aveta Sampson.
Former IDEOer.
Former IDEOer. I absolutely love how she thinks and talks about AI. And the third one is not really a creative thinker in the like basic definition of it, but Hank Green. If you don't follow him on YouTube, the way he talks about science and AI recently and like everything happening in the world is so good and so creative and so balanced, and I think so needed today to just like get a perspective like that. All right, I'll shut up about the people I admire right now.
What's a skill you're currently working on?
Crochet.
Really?
Yeah.
I crochet, so that's cool.
Yeah, I started with the little dolls, the amigurumis, and now
Yeah.
I have a pattern for a sweater that I don't know how it's gonna go, but I'm gonna get it started soon.
Amazing. What's a skill you're proud of?
Maths.
I'd be
I
proud
don't
of it
know
too.
if it qualifies as a skill, but I think the reason I'm still proud of it is because I find I'm still better than AI at maths. So it helps.
That's awesome. I think it's a skill.
Yeah.
What's a mistake that you have learned from?
I remember a couple of years ago, I worked on a project that was a little complex in terms of what the clients expected of us in the
Okay.
given time frame. Like there was a type of work that I was supposed to do in a month, and it kept getting pushed back because of a lot of client management stuff. And I ended up having a week to do it before I go off on vacation. So I slept 2 hours a night and did a month worth of work in a week just so I can deliver on what I promised I would in a month. And I burned out and it was not fun. And where I think the learning moment happened for me wasn't even in like the not sleeping and the burnout. It was when one of the guides on that project came up to me afterwards and was like, "Great that you did all that. And now you've set an unrealistic expectation for yourself and for everyone who will be in your role on projects like this in the future. So maybe just say no." So now I'm really better at saying no to things that aren't reasonable to do in a short time.
Such a good lesson.
Yeah.
What's a philosophy that you live by?
Don't forget to look up. It's been I think since I was in high school. I saw that on a sticker in the movie Contact. And then there was the movie Look Up or Don't Look Up.
Don't look up.
I'm like,
Yeah.
it's really important to look up from your own stuff every once in a while. and see the bigger picture.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh man. Okay. Um, don't stress out about the future as much because it's so much better and worse than you ever imagined. That's I feel like 10 years ago, I was just like so stressed out about where my life is going and what I'm doing with myself. And I'm like, there was COVID and everything that's happening in the world today. And like I had so many like personal losses and all these things, like and I'm still okay. So all of that stress was for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good lesson for all of us. The worrying about the things you can't control maybe doesn't set you up in the best way.
Yeah.
Angela, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of these questions and being with us here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was great. And thank you to everybody who's listening today, everyone in our community who submitted questions. This conversation only exists because of your curiosity. And I think that really came through in the kinds of questions that we got to explore today. If today's conversation sparked something for you that you want to go deeper on, Angela teaches IDEOU's new course, Human-Centered Research with AI, alongside Hannah Rosenfeld, whose episode we released a few weeks ago. So if you haven't heard that one yet, I'd encourage you to go back and take a listen to it. It's a great companion to this one. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Creative Confidence.